Oh my gosh, I am so excited, you guys. Do I have a surprise for you today? This is going to be a little bit unusual for us, but it's a very, very unique garden tour of orchids in a glass house. So Stuart, take a look at that. We'll give viewers a little bit of a tease. But first of all, I want to show you Command Central. Now I'm going to introduce you to the gentleman who orchestrates all of this. But this is Command Central for 2 different orchid houses he has here, where he can monitor and adjust the humidity to a certain extent, light levels, temperature levels. One is for a cool house, one is for a hot house, and obviously he is quite knowledgeable and the expert to know how to really calibrate all of this, and knows more about orchids than anyone I know for sure. So let's go into this absolutely incredible orchid house and say hello. Here we come.
Welcome.
Come on in. I'm going to let
It's so
Stuart
nice to have you come
in
visit
first.
today, Linda.
Oh my goodness. Dr. Needham, this is just so nice of you. You have met my photographer, Stuart.
Yes, welcome.
And this is just so good of you, and I feel like I'm in heaven.
It is. It
Well,
does
I
feel
bet
that
it
way,
is.
doesn't it? Especially
And-
when it's chilly outside.
Yes, and let me tell you, it's about, we just looked, and it's a little bit above 40 outside, but in here it's a balmy, what's the temperature?
Right about 80,
Oh my
65% humidity. So it's just what these orchids love.
And if it looks like heaven, it also smells like heaven, because the fragrance is just beyond.
That's one of the things that so often people don't realize, is that many orchids are fragrant. Phalaenopsis, which is probably the most commonly grown orchid, typically is not fragrant.
Oh
But
my
there
gosh.
is one species, Phalaenopsis schilleriana, that is fragrant. And it has delightful, like a red rose fragrance
Oh my word.
in the morning. And so it is just the most delightful fragrance to come out here in the morning.
Well, obviously, the way those terms just rolled off your tongue shows that you obviously are very much an expert. So let me introduce Dr. Doug Needham, and please tell us a little bit about your background and how this obsession and expertise in orchid care and orchid cultivation kind of grew over time.
Absolutely. Well, as many orchidists, I got bit by the orchid bug when I was about 14 years old.
Oh, really? It goes back
Yes.
that far. That's
My
wonderful.
grandmother, she and Grandpa lived in Florida and had orchids. And I was fascinated with her orchids. So she gave me one of her orchids. And once you're bit by the orchid bug, it's irrecoverable.
Yeah. You're a goner.
So I have always loved growing flowers.
But you have a PhD
Yes. in floriculture, plant breeding and genetics. So
Oh, my word.
I took that passion for loving to grow flowers from a very young child to be my career. And so I studied horticulture
my
at Purdue
goodness.
University up in Indiana, and
Oh,
got
my.
bachelor's, master's, and PhD. And my specialization was plant breeding and genetics. But my real passion is growing plants.
orchids.
And orchids have always been a really strong passion of mine.
Well, I have to tell you, I knew I liked you immediately. My dad is a graduate from Purdue.
Oh, how
was
about
a
that?
graduate
Another Boilermaker.
from Purdue, another Boilermaker. He went to pharmacy school there.
Oh, yes, very strong
And
pharmacy
yes,
school.
and I have 3 nieces there at
Oh,
Purdue right now.
goodness,
So
how about that?
I know,
Very
so it's
good.
pretty incredible. Well, this is just, first of all, you shared with me earlier that when you moved from Pennsylvania to Oklahoma, that you built this. His home is just gorgeous,
Oh,
by the
thank
way. But you built this glass house as part of the initial structure, and you did all of this long distance. But this was very much planned.
Oh, definitely. Years of
On the front
planning.
end. And dreaming.
And the glass
dreaming.
house is literally decades of dreaming. Because my father and I built
wow.
a greenhouse back when I was a boy, and I had wanted another greenhouse for well over 40 years. So this had
my
been a dream,
goodness.
and it was to be part of this this home and retirement was to have a glass house attached to the home so that plants could go in and out and not have to be out in the weather, and I didn't have to go out in the weather to get
and
to
you know,
that.
that's brilliant, because orchids can be probably temperamental, and a cold shock or a big change in temperature was not a good thing.
That's right. For many orchids, and I don't know if you realize or your followers realize, orchid family, the Orchidaceae, is one of the largest plant families.
Is it really?
It's also one of the most diverse and widespread. The only place that you won't find orchids is Antarctica.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, they exist everywhere else. And so they come from warm climates, they come from mountainous, cool climates, but the bulk of the ones that we think of for growing, especially in the home, are the ones that are coming from lowland tropics, so warm environments. Right. And yes, they do not like to get chilled at all, whereas those from the mountainous regions, that's what they prefer.
They prefer. And as a little bit of an orientation, so this you come out of right off of your, I guess, your laundry room, but there's a large
head house.
A head house. Okay.
Or you might lovingly call it the potting shed.
The potting shed. So the potting shed. So you can take care of all the cultural needs and watering needs and soil and fertilizer. All of that is attached to the glass house.
Right.
So it is a seamless transition when you are out here pleasantly puttering.
Absolutely.
And identifying what needs to be done. So I hardly know where to begin. But how many varieties do you think you have represented here?
Oh, that's a great question. I did not look to see how many genera I have. I know there's about 300 different orchids between the two glass houses, the warm house that we're in now and the cool house. But as to how many genera, that's a great question. I don't know how many genera I have. I'll just venture a guess. There's probably only about 30 to maybe 40 genera represented.
Oh my gosh.
As I mentioned, orchids are a huge family. 28,000 plus species of orchids.
And they're so much more accessible and affordable than they used to be. It's so much more. So here's my question of the day for all of you out there. Do you grow orchids? Do you cultivate them? And if so, what varieties, and where do you find them? Because now you can find them everywhere from your grocery store to high-end nurseries to those who have really specialty collections like yourself.
It is now the #1 floriculture crop.
Is it really?
Yes. It has bumped the poinsettia out of that position that poinsettia has held for decades.
Okay. Now, next time you're playing Trivial Pursuit, you got that. You got that from us. Well, so would you say that Phalaenopsis are the most common?
It really is.
Common orchid?
It is probably the most common for a couple of reasons. One, it's so well adapted to the home environment because it's one of these lowland tropic plants. It's native to Southeast Asia, New Guinea, Australia, warm climates, and so it does really well in the home. The other key was research that was done, at this point, that's probably 20 years ago or maybe even more, that determined the flowering initiation for Phalaenopsis.
Wow.
Orchids are different than many of our other plants, and it has taken a long time to figure out how to get them to initiate flowers. With Phalaenopsis, it was discovered that all they have to have is a cooler night, and by cooler I mean 68 degrees Fahrenheit or less. And as long as the following day is not over about 82, they will initiate flower spikes.
Oh, wow.
And so consequently, that's why here in Oklahoma, these all initiate their spikes in about September, and then they are in full bloom once you get to spring.
Look at this.
Oh yeah, isn't this fabulous? This is Silogene usitana. Isn't that spectacular?
Word.
Would you believe it's a sequential bloomer, and it has been in flower since last May.
Oh my word.
So you can count back. Each of these little zigzags was where a flower was, and you can literally count back to see what month it started.
Yeah, it looks almost like it. I mean, like it was intentional that would just have that one gorgeous bloom at the end of.
And that's how it flowers.
That is
one
just
blossom at a
amazing.
time. And as that one is approaching its end of life, the next one will have expanded and be just ready to open.
So that must also be part of your obsession, not just with the beauty, but with their habits and what they like and what they don't like, and they're very distinctive things that they provide to you as a grower. And
as I mentioned, my passion is growing. More than the breeding and genetics,
Right.
I love growing. I love figuring out what it takes to make that plant grow its best. And I always start by looking to where is it grown natively.
Yeah. Which is good advice for no matter what you're growing. Let's move down a little bit this way. No matter what you're growing inside or outside, where did it originate? Where was it indigenous?
Absolutely.
And
because that's often going to give you the clue not only to its care and how to make it grow as a healthy plant,
right,
but how to get it to flower. And of course, that's what we want with orchids.
Because that's what we want. And I think
we want those beautiful flowers.
Right, and I think maybe we overlook that as a whole separate motivation in and of itself, is what does it need to flower, not just to grow. So many different varieties.
So for some of them, it is temperature. And like the Phalaenopsis, that slight decrease in nighttime temperature is what triggers the flowering. For others, like some of the Dendrobiums, they have to go through a dry, and I mean totally dry, winter rest.
Well, if we could only orchestrate and manage humidity and temperature like you do with your Command Central here outside in Oklahoma, which is always a challenge.
Very much
What
a
are
challenge.
these with this exotic root system?
Yes. Well, these are Vanda orchids. Most orchids are what are called epiphytes, meaning that they grow attached to a tree and they take moisture from the air, whether it's from fog passing through or a gentle rain, but they just hold on to the tree. They don't take anything from the tree. They're not parasites, they're epiphytes.
And in a symbiotic relationship with their host?
That's with respect to their seed. They have a symbiotic relationship with fungi in order for the seed to germinate. But with that tree, they're literally just holding on. And so
look at that. It's just insane. It does not even look real. It does not even look real.
These are Vandas, mostly.
And these would have been indigenous to...
So Vandas are going to be, again, lowland tropics, Southeast Asia, New Guinea, Pacific Islands, very similar to where you would find the Phalaenopsis.
Well, I must ask you, and I'll pick your brain later, I'm going to be in Singapore in September. My son is getting married, and they live over there, and I bet you know some wonderful places where I could go and see some tremendous orchids.
Absolutely, yes. You must go to Gardens by the Bay.
Okay, well, and I think it's going to be a stop. Now, Stuart, I'm sorry, but I'm going to make you twirl around, because what is this? What are these two incredible? And I also love the way you have grouped the color palettes. So you have over here these fuchsia, the purple lavender, that kind of tonal range. And then over here in this corner, you've got more fall-like colors. And I love the way you have staged that.
Well, thank you. I do like to color group them. The primary reason for the way I group the plants is what's their light requirement. And so, for example, the Phalaenopsis we were looking at, they all need shade. So I grow them under the baskets of ferns. But these need not as much shade, but a little more shade than the Cattleyas and the Vandas. For example, Vandas are the highest light.
Okay, so this is something where I think most of us commoners get a little bit intimidated. because you obviously have this wonderful glass house where you are able to manipulate so many different factors to their successful cultivation and bloom. And for the rest of us, what would you tell the rest of us?
So many times we're growing orchids in our homes, or maybe in the office, and we're reliant on the light coming in through the window, or maybe even electric lighting to provide the light for those plants. So based on the orchid that you want to grow, find out how much light does it need, and does my location have that much light? And if so, then have an understanding of, all right, if it's a plant that is wanting a fairly shady location, we're talking about an east exposure, where it gets a little morning sun, but then it's protected the rest of the day.
So the directional exposure would the plant will dictate the directional exposure.
And it's always the best advice to choose the plant for the location.
Right.
Whether you're gardening outdoors or growing on the windowsill.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right
it is,
plant,
it
right
is,
location.
Yes, it is part of my I have something I call a gardening manifesto, and that's the right plant for the right spot. But the other thing is and this may just seem blasphemous to you, but if you just love orchids, I sometimes have to really showcase them in a specific area for short term, just for short term pleasure and a short term kind of just decadence, because they're so beautiful. And then those of us like me who don't have a greenhouse, or we don't have room for a lot of different plants, I then just gift them to someone who can then take them over, get them to rebloom. And because even in less than ideal conditions, they bloom and are beautiful.
And they do, and I'm so glad you
said
that, because that, I think, is one of the worst myths of orchids, is that they're very difficult.
No, you're so right.
No, they're not difficult.
Yes.
And they will rebloom, but they typically rebloom once a year. And so I think often people feel like, oh, I'm not doing something right because it's not flowering. Well, it's just the environment hasn't triggered it yet.
But once they do come into bloom, you have that bloom for such a long period of time. So in terms of the return on your investment for an expenditure of money, I think certainly you get a much better return on your investment for that than you would for a bouquet of cut flowers.
Oh my goodness, yes. And the phalaenopsis that are so common, they literally can be in bloom for 3 months or longer. Yes. Isn't that gorgeous?
Oh my gosh.
This cattleya has been in flower for nearly 3 weeks now, and it is one of those, as you say, sometimes you like to take them in. Jackie and I have enjoyed that one in the home. It's nice to be able to take them in and enjoy the fabulous fragrance.
Oh, yes.
This
one, I was going to say,
fabulous
I am close
fragrance.
to the source.
Yes, that is
Stuart, you're going to have
Irene Finney.
Oh my word.
Very fragrant.
And it's so, I find it equally as fascinating, but also equally as beautiful is just how they grow and their root system and just how it tumbles out and the organic beauty of it with the bark that is planted in. Every facet of the plant itself, in addition to the bloom, every facet, these globular stems,
the pseudobulbs, yes, right,
is just breathtaking.
You noted something that is different depending on the particular orchid, and that's what type of media, if any at all, it's grown in.
Yes.
So, as I mentioned previously, most orchids are epiphytes. So they're growing on tree branches. So if you look deep in that, you can see that it's just a chunk of a tree branch.
That is
This is how they would grow
fascinating. Stuart,
in
can you
nature.
capture that?
Sure. And so you can see how the roots literally attach to the surface of that wood.
And the color palette here.
Isn't that beautiful?
The gradations and the color echoes and the depth of green and light green. And let me just also say this is remarkably heavy. I mean, it is. It is very
heavy.
deceptive.
Hang that back up for you.
That is just, and you know, the other thing is this isn't even in bloom, but for those out there that are Tillandsia lovers and things, this does. You know, you may not have
such beautiful form.
It just has such beautiful form that, in many ways, it does speak to me and resonates with me every bit as much as the flowers.
But you noted how the Vandas, for example, or these are Vandas here as well, they are not in any media. And so they get watered every morning. These roots get watered. Versus the Cattleya, for example, that was in the bark-based media, it gets watered, depending on the time of year, once to twice a week.
Once to twice a week, in addition to whatever ambient moisture they're made.
Exactly, because they're getting moisture from
this guy we're talking about?
These are both Vandas,
yes,
yeah.
Yes. And just, I mean, just look at this. You could make a sculpture out of this. I mean, you could dip this in bronze.
Isn't the root system fascinating?
It would just be spectacular, but nature, this is where I almost get speechless. I mean, look at this. Look at the contrast of this root system with...
And look at these. This is where they're actively ingrown.
Oh my gosh.
So you can see those active root meristem
Yes.
tips.
Yes, and how they are differentiated from these older roots that have kind of dried, and then the contrast between the root system and the form of the leaves. And that's the other thing, the leaves on all of these different orchids, they're certainly not monolithic. I mean, they're all
very different shapes.
They're all different shapes, they're different.
Some are thin, some are
thick.
Feel how heavy and thick that is.
Some are down, oh my word. So this is maybe an off-the-wall question, but were they used by Native American cultures, or from an anthropological sense, do you know how they might have been used in a practical way?
I do not know. I don't know of any ethnobotanical uses for orchids, as there are with so many other plants. When I was in China, I was served Dendrobium tea, though.
Was it hallucinogenic in any form?
But it was made from a Dendrobium orchid.
Well, you talk about this. These are just, you could drink out of these practically.
Oh,
I mean, they're
so
thick and so
heavy.
sturdy, and so you could use them as a funnel or something.
I'll lift this down because these blossoms are just such spectacular color.
I mean,
I want you to be able to see that
look at that.
rich garnet. Isn't that
and
gorgeous?
The speckling.
Yes.
So now talk to us a little bit about pollination.
Pollination on orchids it's very unique. The orchid has a column, and the male and female parts are fused together in that column, which is very different.
Oh my word.
So that's actually part of the taxonomy that we look to discover orchid. And many orchids are pollinated by insects or other animals, such as a bird or a bat, but often it's insects, bees and moths, and they'll visit that flower, and when they bump up against that column, the pollinia is very sticky and large, and it will stick to the insect, and off it goes to the next flower, and when it visits that flower, then it rubs and off.
So the exotic nature and color of the blooms is probably one of the reasons that it looks that way, is to attract pollinators?
Yes, in fact, if we could look at this in ultraviolet wavelengths, we would probably see some very different patterns than what our human eyes can see that insects see. Additionally,
that new David Attenborough talks about that.
Yes,
I can tell Stuart is absolutely captivated by all this. And let me just digress for a little bit, because one of the things, and you may hear the fans going, and they're
you're
here.
Hearing the vents opening.
Yeah, and Stuart, if you don't mind,
just
kind of pointing up to show some of the mechanics.
Right behind you, Stuart, the fog just came on to bring the humidity up in here.
And you've got the fan to project it outward. But The other thing about this entire space, and what I often say about gardening in general, is that gardening should be experiential. It's not just something that we look at because it's eye candy or whatever. It is very experiential, and just coming in here, I mean, you just know that you're entering something special, almost temple-like, because there is great beauty, but there's also, you're kind of assaulted by sound and changes in temperature and changes in humidity. And then down to, you've got a water feature here with that very meditative sound. You have some, I'm sure, very carefully curated selection of music that is very meditative, that lends itself to just the entire ambiance.
Well, and that was all part of the design.
Of course,
was to have a section within the warm house that we call the conservatory with seating.
Yeah,
so
and isn't this
friends
just
come to visit, we can sit, have a little conversation.
I may be back. I may be back. You may be my new best friend.
Jackie and I love to come out here and have lunch and just enjoy the warmth and the fragrance.
Oh yeah, and just the colors and nature is just such an inspiration.
Isn't this spectacular one here? This is Durabaculatum undulatum.
Durabaculatum undulatum.
And look at the undulations on those petals.
Their aurea needs to be in there. Surely in the naming of
notice, this plant is almost as tall as I am.
Oh my gosh.
That's why it's sitting on the floor.
Yes, and don't you love the way that just comes off your tongue? Undulatum, next to the undulated succulent that you have over here in this highlight area. And then sometimes we're so busy looking at the smaller specimens and the floral specimens that we don't look at the structural components that you have here in this plumeria. Yeah,
so, the plumeria, it has to go through a dry winter rest of dormancy, and so it spent the winter dormant in the garage, and I brought it out into the glass house.
And then you have a poinsettia that's been knocked off its throne.
It has been knocked off its throne. It's no longer the #1 floriculture crop. But we still love them, and they're still beautiful.
And so a lot of the fragrance in here is coming from this.
Lemon.
Is it a lime or lemon?
It's
Meyer
a
lemon?
Yeah, it's an improved Meyer.
Oh my goodness.
So fragrant.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
We harvested, I think, 9 lemons in January when our daughter was visiting from Seattle, and we love to make something special from them.
How do you ever go in? I mean, I would come out here and just be so magnetized to this area that I would have a hard time ever going back inside.
Jackie knows when she doesn't see me for a while.
She knows where you are.
Yeah.
The beautiful ficus over here and fiddly fig over here. Yeah. And you've got Christmas cactus in here waiting for its season.
Yeah, so they were in full bloom back at Thanksgiving through Christmas. And there's even a sporadic one yet popping out.
Just because. They wanted to join the party. So Stuart, if you don't mind kind of doing a long view of what it looks like from this vantage point before we go into...
If you guys want to open the door,
okay. Okay. And can I just say this is very welcome because it was starting to get a little steamy. Yeah, a little steamy in there.
So welcome to the cool house.
Welcome to the cool house. We are exiting the hot house.
We've just taken a hike into the mountains and we're not even winded.
And the fragrance out here, probably attributed to that climbing jasmine over in the corner,
basket,
but is also accessible. So here we have lady slippers orchids, and you're going to have to pronounce that for me.
So this is Phragmipedium, and it is also known as a lady slipper. Probably more common is the Paphiopedilum that's known as lady slipper. And so there's cool-growing Paphiopedilums down here at the other end. There were warm-growing Paphiopedilums in the other house. But they all share that common feature of the pouch,
Which is just
which
so
it
dear.
looks like the lady's slipper.
Which is so dear.
It really does.
And it only took you a lifetime to acquire all the knowledge you needed to know where everything had to be positioned just perfectly. And it's such a testament to your expertise and your aesthetic sensibilities and just and just everything, because it just, now I want one. But I don't have any of the expertise or the room. But look, I mean,
Isn't that beautiful?
the color.
Oh, such rich color. And the sheen, just spectacular. So this is what used to be called Odontoglossum. Now they've all been lumped into the Oncidiums, but I still refer to it as the Odontoglossum type, because it doesn't look like the dancing doll type of Oncidium that's down in the warm house.
I love the lore to the lore behind, anyone who's ever, made a little hollyhock doll or something can really appreciate the, what's it called, anthropomorphism, when you assign human qualities to a botanical, because these are just exquisite. And like, I'm thinking a paint color needs to be named after that, because
Such
I just
deep
don't
color.
recall even seeing that anywhere.
And although these are not currently in flower, they flower in the summertime. They are one of my favorites, and they are known as the tulip orchid. It's anguloa.
And
so the
have
flower resembles
a
a tulip, but they flower usually about July and August.
So now I have to ask you, does Jackie, I mean, obviously she can enjoy and share in the pleasure of all of this. Does she share in your fascination in terms of care and cultivation and everything? Or does she just rely on you and she just gets to enjoy them?
She knows that this is my hobby.
This is your
in
purview,
retirement,
and yeah.
And she always offers, do you need me to help water anything? But she does not do as much as she used to. Prior to retiring, she took primary care of the orchid collection when we lived in Pennsylvania.
Oh my gosh.
And so she would do all of the watering and the care. And only on a weekend, if it happened to hit just right, would I be the one taking care of them.
Well,
So now she gets to rest, and I have the joy of taking care of them.
Does Jackie, your wife, I should say who that is, Jackie, your wife, does she have a specific obsession of her own that's as equal to yours with orchids, or does she just...
Her obsession is exercise.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Good for her.
And she does Zoom exercise sessions with ladies in Pennsylvania.
I love it.
And ladies in Indiana.
I love it. You have built a community. So people are going to want to know, how did you get to Oklahoma?
So right out of grad school at Purdue, I was hired by Oklahoma State University as a young assistant professor, worked my way up through the ranks to full professor, and was with OSU for nearly 20 years when I was recruited away to Longwood Gardens out in Pennsylvania.
Yes, and many of you are familiar with Longwood Gardens, and do you know I have not been? And
Oh.
I know I'm ashamed to even say that, but it is on my bucket list.
Well, you'll definitely want to plan a visit. Longwood is currently constructing the West Conservatory Complex. So an entire new conservatory structure is being built right now.
Maybe it will be
so
worth
you'll
worth
need to
my
go
wait.
for a visit when that
Yeah.
gets completed. In fact, they just
Multi-day
reopened
visit.
the Orchid House, which was
Oh,
part of
wow.
this major reimagination.
Renovation. So these over here, these cymbidiums
Yes.
are just... So at what altitude would these grow?
So these are from high montane areas. They would be found in the Himalayas and mountains of China and India. The elevation, I don't know what it is.
But definitely a mountainous
Yeah.
environment, cool mountainous
Probably.
environment. Look at those little deers.
I don't know if I even have that on the card. I would guess probably somewhere around 8,000 feet. so often when you read about them, everything's in metric.
Yes, yeah, I know. And we
And
can't,
then you
it's
have to
hard for
kind
us
of
to make a
translate. Let's see,
mental,
what was that I remember reading?
mental translation. Well, the Cymbidiums are gorgeous, as is just the entirety. Okay, let's close on this over here when you get around to it, Stuart. Stuart's just so fascinated. He
So Stuart, you may
Yeah,
be noticing these buds that are just forming. See all these buds that are
Oh, those
popping
are
out?
buds.
Those are flower buds. So
I
that's
thought those were spent.
No, that is one of the dendrobiums that goes completely dry over winter. So it doesn't get any water from November through February. And just this past month of March, I've watered it twice as it's starting to wake back up. And the first thing you see are those flower buds coming out of those canes.
And isn't it so exciting? It's
And
just
that's,
like,
yeah, these dendrobiums are the same way. See this bulge right here?
Yes.
And there, and there, and there, and there, and there. Those are the flower buds just beginning to emerge, because these also went through a dry winter rest. You may have noticed my little red tags. These are things that remind me of culture. DWR is dry winter rest, November through January, for these Dendrobium nobiles.
You know, that's really that's a great tip for anything you're growing, is to have something like there where you have your own
Reminder.
your own little reminder of what something wants, so that you can provide it. So make the rest of us normal humans feel better. Have you ever killed an orchid?
Oh, absolutely. That's part of being an orchid grower.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm a huge, I love topiary. I'm a huge topiarist. And people say, well, what's the biggest category of topiary that you grow? And I said, dead. And I don't grow them, they're just there. Because the experimentation is all part of it, I think.
It is. It's a learning process. And even though I have grown orchids since I was 14, it's still a learning process. And there are still some that I find, I just don't have something quite right.
Yeah.
Either the plant's not growing as well, or it's not flowering as well. And so that's part of the fun.
Yeah.
It's a puzzle
Yeah.
to figure out, okay, what do I need to do differently?
Yeah.
Is it temperature? Is it moisture level? Is it that it needs to be cool and totally dry over winter?
Right.
What's that combination?
Yeah. It's that, just being a detective,
Yeah.
being a plant detective. And I think sometimes knowing when to just keep your hands off, as in the case of these dendrobiums.
Dendrobium nobilis, that's
Dendrobium.
right. Yeah,
Just,
I mean,
okay, hands off, no watering, and let it do its own thing.
you have hit on the most common reason for orchids dying, and that's overwatering. Most people, we want to care for our plants, and we think that we're caring for them by watering. But remember, most orchids are epiphytes. So what does that mean? It means that air is absolutely as critical, if not more, than water.
So
they have to have water, but they've got to have
Better to
air.
plug in a humidifier than douse them from
It's
your watering
better to
can.
wait a day and water the next day. If you're not quite sure, wait
That's
a day.
great advice.
Yeah.
For so many things. I cannot thank you enough. This has just been, I mean,
It's
the
been a
highlight.
pleasure to have
a
you and Stuart
highlight
come
of-
visit.
No, we absolutely, you won't be able to keep us away. Because we're going to be back to go to Bastani.
Oh, very
and,
good.
yeah, see
Visit
Steve and
Steve and
Ruth
Ruth,
over
yeah,
there, and
absolutely.
everything wondrous that they have. So when we come back through Stillwater, we just might have to come back again.
Well, you are always welcome, and
Yes.
that is one of the great pleasures of having a very diverse orchid collection. There's always something different coming into bloom.
Yeah, well, it is absolutely incredible, as are you. Thank you, kind sir.
Oh, you're most welcome.
So appreciate
Good to have
it.
you come visit. Stuart, good to have you as well.
Well, if you've held on this long, here is my outfit of the day. My earrings are just some large gold hoops off of Amazon. My top is a sweater. It's kind of lightweight from Altered State, and I've got a J. Crew long sleeve t-shirt on underneath it. My belt is, I think it's from Nordstrom Rack. My breeches, I am really loving these wide leg loose breeches. They are wonderful for traveling. They're wonderful to walk around in. They're just so so comfortable. I love them. And then my booties are Forever 21, I believe. And my bracelet ensemble you have seen before is, this was a Mother's Day gift from my husband, and these other 2 pieces came from my mother-in-law. So there you go. There's my outfit of the day.